I call the Honourable Member Jan Logie.
Mr Chair, thank you for this chance to speak to Part 3 of the bill. And again, there's quite a lot to say. I'd just also like to follow up from my colleague Holly Walker's previous speech, talking about the financial veto and the use of that and the cost of the sanctions. And while the Minister has responded quite constructively around the issues of the work and income workers not being able to make that assessment in terms of the well-being of the child, I think that doesn't undermine the point my colleague was making about the welfare of the child. And I think when we recognise that the regional public health survey around healthy food costs that came out earlier this year that showed that somebody on the DPB with 2 children, after paying the average rent in Eastern Porirua and providing the very basics of a healthy food diet, would have $100 a week left after, and that was looking at an income of the DPB and accommodation supplement and other tax credits. $100 a week. It's not hard to see that a cut to your benefit, of any cut to your benefit, let alone a cut of 50%, is going to affect a parent's ability to feed, clothe and adequately care for their child. I think that the government's admission of saving combined with that response is quite clear evidence of that, and I think all of us in the House who have a real concern in terms of child poverty should be taking that quite seriously. I also would like to just address the statement that's been offered many times about parents and families being better off in work. I think we have to really question why that is. Because we know that 2 out of 5 families living in poverty in this country are working families. We know that families on welfare are living in poverty. That's without a question. But the response to that isn't necessarily to push people into work. Maybe the sensible response to that is actually to lift things up from our base, to improve welfare payments and, by virtue of doing that, improve work conditions. Actually, that may be a more sustainable way of addressing child poverty, rather than cutting the base, pushing more people into the job market when there aren't extra jobs, which will actually undermine people's ability to negotiate for better wages and better conditions that would enable them to stay and work for longer. This bill is setting up an unsustainable, vicious cycle for people that are going to keep them trapped in poverty. And that should be of concern to every member in this House. I would also just like to speak to how these changes are a furthering of the Future Focus Act amendments in terms of work testing for parents on the DPB, and how that seems to have been creating a bit more of a culture of disentitlement within the department that we're seeing by an increased number of cases that are going to appeal, where the appeals being the original decisions being overturned, by the anecdotal stories that we're hearing from people not being told about the discretion, not being told of their actual basic entitlements. And we're just hearing far too many of those stories for that not to seem to be a symptom of a culture. That this work testing, this belief that people should be in work at all costs. And I've raised it before, and I'm going to continue to raise it, the issue of discretion and domestic violence. There is a work test exemption that's available for victims of violence, in February, I think it was, 22 people had been given that exemption. I know there are more than that in Wellington, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair.
I call the Honourable Member Sua Williams-Seo.